Hello and welcome to another episode of the Renegades Sports Podcast. I'm Jake Gable, as always joined by Jacob Smedley, and it's college football playoff season. The first time in history that 12 teams are going to be going, and I'm pretty excited. I think this is made for a lot of exciting college football games. Jacob, isn't this just a great time of year?
Yeah, such a wonderful time of year. Of course, we just talked about the NFL, but college football, as you mentioned, Jake, it's been a lot of controversy in recent years regarding the college football playoff, which has been around for nearly now a decade, which is so hard to believe. It feels like, that they just implemented it with, it used to be the four teams starting out. It was the top four teams that made the playoff. And now this year, Jake, 12 teams are in it, kind of taking a little page out of college basketball March Madness. Of course, not the full, field of 64 or whatever, but this is 12 teams. There's more teams in it. There's more chances for other schools to get involved and win the whole thing. It's super exciting.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what we see this year because there's numerous schools that you never see in that top four playoff. There's a lot of schools that, are fighting for something they've never even had a chance at before. So I think that makes it exciting. But we're going to talk about how we've viewed how it's been so far because let's face it, this is year one of a system that they just implemented, and it's not going to be perfect in its first year. Hey, maybe you think it is. Maybe Jacob is like, never change it for the rest of your life. But I know that there's a lot of people that aren't fans of certain aspects of it. And I know Alabama is not a fan of this format at all because a lot of Alabama fans and other people as well think that they should have been included. But that's going to happen in any playoff format. So we'll talk about some pros, some cons, and maybe what we might do if we had the power to adjust it a little bit in the future. Now, I think a pro, besides just adding more teams to it, is that the teams in non-power, power four now conferences, power five, whatever you want to call them,
exactly,
have a chance. And it was implemented that they'd at least get the 12 seed if they won their conference championship. I really like that aspect. And Boise State ended up with the third seed, which is, I never saw that coming, but it gave fans in the Mountain West Conference, the American Athletic Conference, conferences that it was almost unheard of to make the four. I know Cincinnati made it in the American a few years back.
And that still had its own arguments and stuff from people, like this team, of course, they went, undefeated in this conference, and then they made it and, still showed themselves on the biggest stage. But yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so I think now there's a little bit less controversy of, it's 12-0 versus 11-11, who gets the fourth and final spot. Now, Boise State is like, there's no way you don't include them, and they ended up getting an automatic bid into it, which is another new thing that's never existed. Automatic bids, kind of like how college basketball has, like you were saying. So I like that aspect of it, opening up for new teams.
Yeah, and I think another aspect, kind of looking into it as well, because I know you take a deeper dive into the players. One of the biggest, I think, negatives that college football has faced, a lot of players just sit out in bowl games because they have the NFL draft coming up now with NIL that has added a new dimension into collegiate athletics where, I'm still going to get paid. I'm just going to sit out and prepare for the NFL draft. Now there's a whole new new layer of meaning where, again, a guy that's maybe on a team that's 13th ranked in the country or 12th ranked in the country, you still have so much to play for, not only in the conference championships, which mean so much more now, as you mentioned, Jake, in those other, conferences that aren't the SEC or the Big Ten that have all these great teams as it is. But these players now, they have more ability to showcase their talent, to rise their stock in the draft. They have, even though, maybe some guys still may sit out in bowl games that aren't in the college football playoffs, there's more teams in it. There's more guys that are going to want to be motivated to play. And I feel like there's going to be more really good games which draw in fans from across now the world in college football watching these games. So I think we're in the same wavelength. Another positive is I think these home games now that they have. Yeah, exactly. On the same wavelength again, Jake. I love that kind of NFL postseason atmosphere that's now created where you get another game in Happy Valley, another game at Ohio State, the shoe, everyone going out to these games. And while, of course, there's still the bowl games at the neutral site, you have that one last chance where you get the home crowd, that NCAA football ruckus atmosphere there for the playoff, which I think is really cool and another pro that's added to this expanded format.
And I mean, if you think those stadiums have gone crazy before for their rivalry games, like Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State playing whoever happens to be their rival that year, they seem to have a lot of teams that don't like them. But you think those places are going crazy. Now it's a playoff game. Literally never happened before that their fans get to have an influence because of the home field advantage. I think it'll be very interesting. And I'm curious how many of those home teams in that first round end up winning and how much of a factor that is. Mm-hmm. Now, I do want to say one con that I'm not fully convinced is a con or not. I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
The format of how the seeding works. Because there's 4 teams that get byes, and those 4 teams are all conference champions. And how it worked out this year, well, the first 2 teams, Georgia and Oregon, I think people were completely fine with getting byes. But Boise State and Arizona State, teams that in the poll were around 9 and 12, I believe, for Arizona State, end up in the 3rd and 4th seed just because they won their conference championship game. What's your thought on that? Because Texas was really the 3rd team in rankings, but they end up with the 5 seed. It moves some people down, and it ends up kicking Alabama out for Clemson. What's your thought on that? And do you like it? Do you not? Or is lukewarm on it?
Yeah, I think they, we talked about a little bit earlier about the conference champions and how, previously it was like they're not rewarded at all in this 4-team playoff. You got teams that like Alabama before when they were, like 11-1 and maybe lost the SEC championship and got into that 4th seed. Now I think we're rewarding them a little too much. Like, I feel like there's a balance there. Yeah, I see where you're coming from, where, some of these teams, especially when you look at the strength of schedule, you look at, the teams that some of these, teams are playing, and hopefully Boise State and Arizona State come up to the challenge, and we'll get into those matchups in just a little bit. But, you wonder a little bit about the strength of schedule going up against a Texas, a Penn State, a SMU even in the ACC that have played such good competition. And these smaller conferences, this could be, like you mentioned, a con down the line. Maybe the first year they give them a break, they're trying something out. But if this is the future of the format, that's a question that you have to deal with, especially when you're cutting out a team that did have 3 losses in Alabama, but still in such a tough conference. I think they gave their bid and gave the best shot to be in there. So it's it's very
Yeah.
interesting how they award it in that
Mhm.
sense moving forward. Another con, I guess, that I have too is I guess, yeah, that it was also kind of that seeding and also, that is it going to be this 12 team? How are they gonna There's still those factors of kind of like the NFL. When the NFL expanded their playoff format, a lot of people were questioning, oh, this 8 and 9 team made the playoffs. Like, they of course they're trying to up the ratings, but that also comes at a cost where you're allowing a team that wouldn't have made it before in there with a worse record. You get another game in there on a playoff format on a big stage, but how is that gonna work? Is it gonna be a blowout, one-sided game like that? Guess we'll have to wait and see. But I feel like that's another con that kind of is an underlying lying one with more teams involved.
I just have really quickly one rule proposal to it that I don't think would change it too much, but might help with some of the things that we've said we might not agree with totally. In like college basketball, you get the automatic bid for winning your conference championship. You still leave those 5 spots, but it doesn't affect your seeding. So if you're
Oh.
Boise State, if you were ranked at, I believe, 9 of they were
Yeah.
ranked, they stay at 9. They don't get to move up to the automatic bye. So whoever those first 4 teams are in the ranking, even if they didn't win their conference championship, still get the bye. And it's just best
Mhm.
12 teams, maybe 14 was a conference champion and they still leapfrog one,
Uh-huh.
but they don't get to be in that
Yeah,
bye
they end
scenario.
up being a bottom. That's
Mhm.
interesting, Jake. I want to see if they implement it. College Football Playoff Committee. Jake has a proposal. I'm for that. I think, since they're in this trying out mode, maybe, see how it goes this year, but something to think about. That's interesting, Jake.
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll see. Yeah, we'll see. Well, Jake and I have made brackets. We have we have all the seating, all the teams are set for the college football playoff that starts on the 20th, right? Of December. Starts
Yeah.
very quickly because of all of the games that will be played. So, Jake, do you want to start going through these matchups here?
Yeah.
We've each made brackets. We're going to break it all down and give our thoughts. May have some different thoughts on these games. I'm excited to get into
I know, I know. So,
it.
all right, the first game, I'm just going in the list of how it was listed on the bracket that I printed out.
Mhm.
Number 12, Clemson, going to Austin, Texas to take on the University of Texas, the 12-5 matchup. I do have Texas in this one. I have it pretty handily winning here. I don't think it's necessarily going to be a cakewalk, but I think Texas's defense is just too strong for Clemson. Clemson got a little lucky at the end there, even getting to their conference championship game. Got some help from Syracuse to get into
Mhm.
that. I just don't think that Clemson has the talent that Texas does. But if there's one thing that might go in the favor of the Tigers, they don't turn the ball over too much. So if they're able to play, a flawless game in terms of turnover margin, force some turnovers on Texas's offense, then you could see Dabo and the crew make an upset. But I find that really hard to believe. I have Texas winning.
Jake, your last point is the reason why I went with the Clemson
Oh,
Tigers
no
in the
way.
12-5 upset in the first game. Jake, I was looking through the numbers. I was looking at Quinn Ewers and his performances
Mhm.
so far this year. And he's had some games where he's put up monster numbers and led the Longhorns to incredible offensive performances this season. But against really good teams and good defenses, I know Clemson, even though it's been a down year, they've really been retooling over the past few years under Dabo Swinney. There hasn't been the same amount of success that we've known from him at Clemson in recent years. They're riding high from the momentum that, like you said, they got into the ACC championship. There was some last-minute heroics involved with the field goal, but as you'll see with some of my picks, I think momentum is a real thing. And even though these teams are going to be coming off of this layoff, I think Clemson, you look at Cade Klubik, he doesn't turn the football over as much as Quinn Ewers, and that's what I'm looking at. If Clemson can get into that game and play the way that they want to, offensively and defensively, playing the game slow, running the football, being safe with it, I think that they can knock off the Longhorns, who played in a slug-it-out, slow game with Georgia. And if Clemson can do that again and force some turnovers like you mentioned, I'm putting the Tigers ahead in an upset in the first round.
Wow, you're coming out swinging, man.
Yeah.
You're coming out swinging. I mean, hey, that would be pretty crazy, and I think would automatically make this format a success, even though I think it will be no matter what. But
Yeah.
you have a 12 seed winning their first ever game. That would be great. All right, I'll go to the next spot on the bracket. Probably the most anticipated first round matchup. You got Tennessee going to Columbus, Ohio for Ohio State. 8-9 matchup. This was really tough for me because I think these teams are very even. I think Tennessee ran into a little bad luck here because I think both of these teams could easily be second round teams.
Yeah.
But they end up facing each other here. One thing I found when I was doing some research, Tennessee's got 2 losses on the year, both of them on the road. And this is going to be a road game for them. And in those 2 losses, their defense has forced no turnovers. 2 losses, no turnovers. I think Ohio State, I know they played really bad against Michigan. If that team comes out and plays Tennessee, they're going to get the brakes blown off them, and the Volunteers are going to win. But I don't see that happening 2 games in a row. I'm taking Ohio State. I'm sure this one's going to come down to like a field goal at the end of the game, though. I wouldn't be surprised if Tennessee won at all.
So you're trusting Ryan Day to win a big game, Jake?
I am.
I'm just asking. You saw that Tennessee team in person,
I
too.
did. And, I really like Dylan Sampson. He's one of the best running backs in the entire country. Tennessee's got a better run game than Ohio State. But the defense that Ohio State possesses, both good defenses, by the way. I just think that they have defense is easier to predict than whether your offense goes off or not. And I think Ohio State, their offense was terrible against Michigan, but they still held them to 13 points. They easily should have won that game with their defense's performance. I say it not confidently that the Buckeyes win.
Yeah, Jake, we are off to a rough start matching up together because
We're
I
on the
think
same
Tennessee.
wavelength
We were on the same way, but the picks are different. I'm going with Tennessee to take down Ohio State. I think this is the nail in the coffin game for Ryan Day as the Ohio State. I think this is the start. Again, I'm going back to momentum. Of course, I'm not bringing up the stats that you are, Jake, but there's been so much conversation about Ohio State in recent weeks. They lost in a bad fashion to a bad Michigan team at home that cost them a chance in the Big Ten championship game. I like their running game. I think Will Howard has had a great season. And you mentioned their defense, I think is still a top 10 unit in the country with the way that they play, the way that they even play on the road, which I think goes, undermatched with especially how they played at Penn State earlier in the year to take that big game really on the defense after the struggles from the offense. But I think Tennessee right now, I like them more with what they have going on. You say very similar teams, even with the defenses a little bit in Ohio State's favor. I like Tennessee, and I think there's that intangible momentum that's there's the pressure, all of that pressure against Ohio State. You in the playoff again, you had that horrible loss at home against Michigan, all the pressures on Ohio State. I think Ryan Day, all of the pressure, it gets to him. And I think Tennessee in a close game, slugging it out. I think the game's going to be close, just like you're saying, Jake, but I think the Volunteers move on and edge it out.
Hey, I'm here for it. We got 2 upsets, so I
Yeah.
know 9-8 is not really an upset. Technically, it is,
Yeah.
but let's see if you're 3 for 3 or
Yeah.
if we're finally going to agree.
Yeah.
Because I do have Penn State winning at home against SMU. SMU, I do think, is a good team. If you saw the SMU Clemson game, that was a very wild finish, but they just started out so slow. I do think, I'm kind of on the side of defenses here, and I think Penn State's got a great defensive unit, and I think Drew Aller showed me something that I hadn't seen before in the game against Oregon.
Oh,
in the
that
conference
touchdown throw,
championship game.
incredible late in that game.
And they put up a lot of points against Oregon. I know they didn't win, but Aller has been a question mark for me when talking about Penn State for the past 2 seasons, and I just haven't viewed him as that kind of guy that can win a big game like this, but he's kind of changed my mind here. I like Penn State to beat SMU.
Jake, we agree for the first
Hey,
time.
there
There we
we
go.
go.
There we go. I have Penn State moving on as well. We saw this SMU team, the 2 of us, when they were in the American Athletic Conference. And just to kind of talk about them for a second, just their jump to the ACC has been seamless with their program. And again, in that ACC championship, they were favored, I think, to win that game too over Clemson. I mean, they came down to a last-second field goal, but yeah, I think this is where the run ends. And you talked about Drew Aller. I'm looking at Tyler Warren, who just got the award for the best tight end in football. Have to get him involved early. And another game, we just talked about Ohio State, James Franklin, the narrative about winning a big game. Penn State, we talked about it earlier on as being one of those teams that has really never gotten to that top 4. Now they are in. Can they win a big game? There's been a whole lot of conversation about the easiest path, and we'll get to, their future game in a moment. But we're both on the same page that I think that they beat SMU and move on to the next round.
All right, we finally
There we go.
one we agree on. The last first round game. This one might have been my biggest toss-up.
Okay.
Actually, no, I take that back. Tennessee, Ohio State. But this was more of a toss-up than I anticipated it to be. I'll say that. I think it's the second closest game in my eyes. Indiana going to South Bend, Notre Dame, 2 in-state rivals facing each other. I was doing my research on Indiana. Found out they have the number 1 rushing defense in the entire country. And you know what? Notre Dame's strength is running the ball. Riley Leonard, the former Duke quarterback, transferring to Notre Dame, he runs the ball a lot. He's got 14 rushing touchdowns. They rely more on their quarterback's legs than his arm. I think that plays into the favor of Indiana. I don't know if I'd say Indiana's a better team than Notre Dame, but I think they match up to this matchup better than Notre Dame does. I'm taking my first upset. I'm having the Hoosiers, the basketball school, beat Notre Dame and move on to the second round.
Wow. 3 Big Ten teams moving on for Jake there in the first round. The upset, how's it feel to pick an upset? Does it feel good?
It feels invigorating, but also I'm a little scared.
Well, this is when I don't pick an upset, Jay. I'm going with Notre Dame. We have one first round matchup we agree on. I think Notre Dame, I am believing in them. I'm believing in Riley Leonard. I think this team has a talent. You talk about that run defense. I don't think it's gonna matter. I think Notre Dame's still gonna run the football well. They're
If
gonna have
possible.
that home field advantage. I think Indiana, they last game coming off a big win against Purdue, but I think there's also going to be that rust involved. They haven't been on the field for a little bit. Notre Dame, again, one of these teams that's the independent. They didn't have a conference championship. They, played around, played some good teams earlier on, Texas A&M. They played, Army, Navy, both from the AAC. But I think this is a game that Notre Dame's gonna win and make a lot of Notre Dame fans happy. I have them moving on in the 7-10 matchup.
All right. So I'm going to go about this a little differently because I'll tell you my matchup because I believe it's different from yours.
Yes.
Arizona State now coming into the mix.
Yeah.
I have Texas playing them. I know you have Clemson playing them.
Yes, yeah.
So I'll tell you my side of the bracket. I still have Texas advancing again. I do think that it is going to be a battle of the running games. Cam Skattebo of Arizona State, he went absolutely off in their conference championship against Iowa State. He's really good. He's another top running back in the nation. If he can get going, he could make this a much closer game. But Arizona State, not that good at throwing the ball. Quinn Ewers, I know he can be streaky, but even if he's not having a good game, you can always throw Arch Manning in there. Not a bad backup option. I do like Texas to win again and move on to the semifinals.
Well, Jake, since I have Arizona State against Clemson in this matchup, very interested. Two teams that, as we mentioned before, Arizona State that, in Jake's proposal would have been a lower seed playing first. They would be in a 4-12 matchup. And I'm going with the Sun Devils. We talk about Indiana against Notre Dame. I like this matchup on paper. If Clemson advances, I think that's the best case scenario for Arizona State to be able to move on. I think this is a game, you mentioned the running game, that they can set the tempo themselves. This would probably be, again, a lower scoring game. We're talking, 21-17. But I think Arizona State, as a lower seed, as a conference championship, this is, again, like we mentioned, a great outcome for this new format. You have an Arizona State team going to the semifinalists, but we talk about Penn State, the biggest narrative for them coming into a weak side. If Clemson upsets Texas, this could be a golden opportunity for the Sun Devils to move forward. That's how I have it, Jake. I have the 4 seed going to the semifinals.
All right. I mean, hey, we're way different over here, but I like that. And you know what? I think just a little side note here, in the 4-team playoff, you don't have this banter. We get to fill out this bracket like a college basketball March Madness bracket. You have 3 games to predict the former format. And now, who knows who's going to win these games? You might not even have a team advancing to this far for you to even predict. So I think I really like that aspect of it. So for me, moving to the Oregon game, they get to come into play now. I have Ohio State facing them, and this was one of the best games of the year. Ohio State versus Oregon. Oregon ended up winning that one at home by 1 point. I think the exact same thing is going to happen. Maybe not by 1 point, but I think it's going to be really close. But I just think Oregon is more consistent, especially their offense. That Ohio State offense got stopped by Michigan. To me, they've been the most consistent team in college football this entire year, and it's the reason they're the number 1 seed. They're really tough to beat. I think Ohio State has a very good chance to do it, but Oregon's a lot safer, and they just haven't shown me a sign of a true weakness. They're strong on every front.
Yeah, and I have a different matchup, Tennessee, Oregon. But Jake, I'm on the same lines with you. I have Oregon moving on as well. Very similar. I was thinking along the same lines. I think this is, whoever Oregon plays, whether it's Ohio State, Tennessee, that Oregon defense saw it against Penn State in the Big Ten championship game. They have some questions and some concerns letting teams come back. They were up multiple touchdowns in that game, and Penn State was able to fight back and make it a game into the final minute there. So I think regardless of who they play, Tennessee, Ohio State, I think Oregon's going to win, but it's going to be both teams, I think, get into that 30-point territory and sweating it out in the final 4 minutes. But I'm with you, Jake. We agree once again. Oregon's moving on to the semifinals.
So I believe we both have Penn State versus Boise State in this
yes.
next matchup, right?
Yes,
nice to
we
be
do.
on the same page. I wonder who you have winning this.
Okay.
Listen, Ashton Genty, Boise State. I mean, he's so good. He's so good.
Mhm.
And also, their quarterback, Maddox Madsen, is not too shabby at all either. He gets outshined, rightfully so. No offense. But Ashton Genty has been so good. But I do think Penn State's defense and their ability to throw the ball more consistently. I mentioned Drew Aller and you mentioned Tyler Warren earlier. I like Penn State to win this game. This is another game where if they didn't make that comeback against Oregon, I might have been like, hey, they just got blown out by Oregon. I might take Boise State here. I'm going to roll with the Nittany Lions here, but I think this is another really close game. There's a lot of close games on this bracket, which I love. I do want to say Boise State, with running the ball so much, they don't turn the ball over. So if you get a few interceptions from Penn State early, you could be talking about a whole different ball game.
Yeah, I am with you again, Jake. That part of the bracket, we are lock in step so far. Penn State, I have moving on, but I think that's going to be one of the most interesting matchups of the whole playoff. Ashton Genty against that, Penn State, or even SMU if they were to win and upset both of our brackets. I think his running ability on display in the Mountain West. We saw the record-breaking numbers. He's in the Heisman watch, but now he is going up against the best defenses in the country, starting in this matchup with Penn State that we talked about it in the SMU matchup in the first round. But like you said, my concerns for Maddox Madsen, because I feel like Penn State, very similar to how teams who play the Philadelphia Eagles in the NFL, load the box and stop the run and force the pass. I see James Franklin and that defense trying to do a similar thing with Ashton Genty in this, hypothetical matchup where, force Maddox Madsen to beat you. And that's where you could see some turnovers. So I think Penn State moves on.
All right, finally getting to Georgia. We have different teams ending up facing them. Georgia's the hardest team to predict for me because Carson Beck, we don't know if he's going to be playing. He got knocked out of that SEC championship game. Gunnar Stockton moves in. He plays quarterback. He throws an interception, but he makes some plays, does enough, gets his team overtime win against Texas. It's hard to predict here because how does the game plan change? They're so good at throwing the ball, but that's with a different guy under center. Is that going to stay the same? I was surprised at how close I was to putting Indiana in over Georgia, but I just couldn't do it, Jacob. I couldn't do it. I think Georgia wins this regardless of who's at quarterback, just because of that Bulldog defense that sends so many players to the NFL.
Jake, you mentioned that defense, and that's the first place I'm going to go. You talk about the offense. The question marks are there, and that's why I have the 7 seed Fighting Irish in my
Yeah.
matchup. Moving on, neutral site Georgia. They've had just a few games this year where they've just come out slow. They let the other teams dictate the pace. Of course, we are hoping that Carson Beck is healthy and ready to go for this, second round matchup. Thankfully for them, they won. They get this extra, few days of a break that he could be huge. So that is also in play with my ranking, but also again that tight, long overtime game against Georgia Tech. They've played down to their opponents this season, Jake. I think unlike we've seen Georgia in the past where they've just bulldozed teams over and over again with that defense. That defense is a little bit vulnerable. They've sent so many guys to the NFL. There is some turnover there, and no pun intended. But I have Notre Dame. I think, I really like what they're doing. They have that identity with the ground game. They mix in the pass with Riley Leonard. If he limits the turnovers and if they can put Georgia in a hole that they have been in so far this season, why not keep the upsets going, Jake? I am creating a Pennsylvania college football fandom battle or Northeast battle of Notre Dame and Penn State in the semifinals.
That would certainly shake up some families' household rivalries. But man, we're at the semifinals here. I have Texas taking on Oregon. I know you have a different matchup there. But I have a feeling we're going to have the same outcome because I mentioned Oregon, the number 1 seed. They are really good. I think Texas matches up with them very well, and Texas might even have a better defense than the Ducks do. But Oregon's able to run the ball, throw the ball. Dylan Gabriel has quietly been the best quarterback in all of college football this year. And Quinn Ewers has had his ups and downs.
He's been hurt too as well.
Exactly. So I do like Dylan Gabriel and the Ducks to get the win here. I think this could be, I know the bracket won't allow it, but if Texas-Oregon somehow ended up being the national championship game, I don't think people would be upset about it at all. I think that would be a great game that would go down to the wire.
Yeah, Jake, I'm right there with you. I think mine is Oregon versus Arizona State. This, unfortunately, might be a game that might have people scratching their head at the format. This might be, if this happens, might be a lopsided, 20-point win for Oregon and why did Arizona State beat it? But in my bracket, they, had an upset go their way and got to move forward. But I have Oregon winning just like you, Jake. I think that they have the most complete offense that we've seen throughout the year. Of course, anything can happen in the college football playoff. We've seen that before where one team rises to the occasion, and this new format might prove that as well. But I think Oregon has been the most complete offense. Defense has questions, but I think that, they will shine on that side of the bracket.
On the flip side, the other semifinal game, I have Penn State taking on Georgia. And I truly believe this. If Gunnar Stockton is quarterback still after the bye and their quarterfinal game, if Georgia makes it this far, I think Penn State wins it.
Wow.
But I think Carson Beck makes a return. I think we see Carson Beck if Georgia's in the semifinals.
Right.
And that changes things a lot for me. Penn State has trouble upsetting teams. They win the games they're supposed to win. They can't slay Goliath when they end up being David. I feel very uncertain about it. But I have Georgia somehow, some way, still making the national championship.
Jake, we mentioned it before. I have the matchup to end all matchups, at least in the Northeast. Notre Dame, Penn State, fans going crazy. A lot of fans traveling as well. This is a game, two teams with narratives of I can't win in the big games that have circulated them. Two teams that have, storied, programs. And Penn State goes down. I have Notre Dame, the 7th seed, going to the final.
Wow.
I think this is where Penn State falls in a tight game, but I think Notre Dame comes out on top. I think they play the pace that they do. This is going to be, I think, the best team Penn State would go up against. Even Georgia, too, if Georgia's able to win that, like you said, Jake, would be the best team that, Penn State's going up against. And time again, we see Penn State overthinking it in big games. Saw it against Ohio State again this year, where it's a lot of doing just a little too much, and they do a little too much in this game, and Notre Dame goes to the college football final against Oregon.
Ooh, all right, we both have Oregon
Mhm.
making it, but I have Georgia, you have Notre Dame. For me, I mean, Oregon, Georgia, that sounds
Great
like
matchup.
such a great
Yeah.
game. The quarterback situation we talked about, but at the end of the day, I think the Ducks have just been so consistent. They've been so strong. I don't see this Georgia team upsetting them. I have Oregon winning it all. They've been the best team in college football for the entire year. I think Dylan Gabriel, the defense, I mean, just the poise they've shown. They haven't, even when Penn State starts coming back, they stay composed under pressure. I have Oregon winning the first ever 12-team playoff.
And Jake, through all of our differences, all of our different picks, we come to the same champion. I have the Oregon Ducks winning it as well. All the points you mentioned as well. And Dan Lanning, the head coach, I mean, I think it starts with him, his poise and his control. I mean, you see him on the sidelines in that Big Ten championship game. He is kind of leading, very kind of stoic. He's not too high, too low, keeps his emotions kind of in check too, and great leader of that team. And yeah, I think that they run the gauntlet as the number one seed, all the teams going after them, being unbeaten, like the Patriots against the Giants in the Super Bowl, but they get it done. They don't falter. I think they win the playoff as well.
Well, hey, we have very different journeys, but we ended up at the same spot. We both have Oregon winning it, so watch them lose in the second round.
Exactly.
Now. But with all that being said, doesn't that just want to make you watch these games already? But unfortunately, we don't have them to play for you. So that's going to end this episode of the Renegades Sports Podcast.
Yeah, and let us know your bracket. We'll have ours up for you to watch, but let us know what picks you disagree with. What tricks you're like, why did they pick that team? Let us know in the comments below. And subscribe, put notifications on for future episodes of the Renegade Sports Podcast.
And remember, we're not just on YouTube, though you can find us on YouTube Shorts. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok as well. We're making shorts. We're making great content over there, playing some games, playing some trivia. It's a whole lot of fun. Make sure to check them out as well. But that's going to do it for us today. Jake Gable with Jacob Smedley. We both have Oregon winning it. Let's see if that comes true. Thanks for watching this episode of the Renegade Sports Podcast.